pleasure to welcome you to tonight's public event accompanying the Library Gallery exhibition Lost Boys, Amos Baticher's Baltimore, which will stay on view until December 15th. Before introducing today's panel, I'd like to extend my gratitude to several people who made the presentation of Amos's work at UMBC possible. I'd like to thank consulting curators Jonathan Katz and Hunter Ohanian for their generosity in sharing their knowledge of Amos's work and for facilitating my introduction to the artist. At UMBC, I'm grateful to Curator of Exhibitions Emily Cullen and preparators Jared Christensen and Vincent Carney for the beautiful installation. And I'm so appreciative of my team in Special Collections, Susan Graham, Lindsay Laper, Lorraine Ojo Ohikware, Robin Martin, and Acadia Rower for their support and expertise. Foremost, I would like to thank Bill Baticher for lending photographs from Amos's personal collection to the show and for trusting us to carry out this exhibition in Amos's honor. As you may have seen walking around, a signature feature of Amos's photographs is the handwritten notes that the artist inscribed onto his prints. Detailing his subjects' personal histories, filtered through his own recollections, this writing is both autoethnography and historical record of the shifting geographies and personalities of queer Baltimore pre-Stonewall through the height of the AIDS epidemic and into the early 2000s. While these narratives are textual, Amos was also a keeper of oral histories of Baltimore's LGBTQ communities, something that anyone who visited him would know. Walking through his house, looking at photographs, he could point to any model and recall the names, the places, and the stories associated with his subjects. Through his photographs, writing, and oral histories, Amos created a personal archive of late 20th century queer Baltimore. Tonight, our panelists will discuss Amos's contributions to LGBTQ oral histories and situate them more broadly within questions of memory, preservation, ethics, and the role of both individuals and institutions in preserving these vital histories. We'll begin by giving a few minutes to each of our panelists to discuss their own work with oral histories, followed by a discussion and a presentation from students who participated in the summer 2023 interdisciplinary collab LGBTQ+ oral history project. There will be time at the end for Q&A and for refreshments, the pot of gold at the end of this adventure here. So I'm very pleased today to welcome our panelists, Hunter Ohanian, who you see at the far right there. For more than 30 years, Hunter Ohanian has held leadership positions in some of the most important LGBTQ and arts organizations in the country. He was the executive director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archive, as well as the Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art. In addition, he was the head of the College Art Association, the Foundation for Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston, Anderson Ranch Art Center outside of Aspen, Colorado, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Hunter has known and worked with Amos for over a decade and was an indispensable resource for me in assembling this exhibition, and I'm eternally grateful to you for that. He is presently working on a book of Amos's images and stories, which includes many oral histories. Joseph Plaster is a lecturer in the program in Museums and Society and curator in Public Humanities for the Johns Hopkins University Sheridan Libraries. He's the author of Kids on the Street, Queer Kinship and Religion in San Francisco's Tenderloin, which explores the informal support networks that enabled abandoned and runaway queer youth to survive in central city vice districts across the US and in San Francisco's Tenderloin in particular over the past century. Thank you. And Kate Drabinski is principal lecturer of gender, women's, and sexuality studies at UMBC. She serves on the board of Baltimore Heritage and offers walking tours for them about LGBTQ history, civil rights history, and more. She and her students design and produce UMBC's LGBTQ+ oral history project. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to each of the panelists for a few minutes to talk about their work. So Hunter, I'm going to start with you.
Well, Beth, thank you very much, and Beth, I want to thank you publicly for putting together such an amazingly beautiful show, and so thank you. for those of you who don't know Amos's work and never had an opportunity to meet him, this is something that would be unheard of for him. He was very engaged and cognitive and aware of what was going on. Unfortunately, he fell, and that led to a series of things he did not survive. He was living up on his own on St. Paul Street up until the time that he fell in June. And so he knew this exhibition was coming. As Beth said, I mean, she would go visit him and I would go visit him. We'd go through prints and we would go through all of the work. And as Beth mentioned, I'm working on a book of stories that Amos wrote. And the stories really started, as you see, around the edges of the images that you see out there. So starting in 1964, Amos started meeting like-minded individuals, people who shared same-sex attraction as he did. He studied as a writer in college, and he taught public school and then private school for a few years, but then into his 30s and 40s, he really devoted his life as a writer. He never went to art school. He said art school would have ruined him. He said it would have been an awful experience. But he really did start as a writer. And so he met individuals. And so he met individuals in Baltimore in places that probably their parents weren't happy that they were. He met people on hustling corners and gay bars, and he met and what gay life was like in Baltimore and any mid-sized American city at that time. It was how people who were interested, and particularly men who were interested in creating same-sex interactions, to find companionship, to find sex, to find camaraderie, is how they could actually meet each other. It was a meeting place for them. And what Amos did is he learned how to become a photographer. As I said, he didn't go to art school, and he says everything he learned about art, he learned from the Time Life series of photography, which I think is sort of interesting. But he would befriend the individuals, and he would then take their oral histories. Now, he didn't call them oral histories at the time, but he was interested and he was concerned with who these individuals were, who he spent time with. So he knew that Dennis's mother was an alcoholic, or he knew that David's father was a third-generation gay man within that family. He knew people who actually died in prison, who had family members die in prison. And the relationship and the trust that the individuals had with him and the care that he took about recording those histories are what we actually see today. And as we delve into the whole notion of oral histories, why are they important? So the question I want to leave with all of you is, where do oral histories reside when we try to capture a community? Why are they important? How do they react to and respond to those of us in the queer community? We have to remember that a lot of our structure, now it's much better off now than it was when I was in college in the 70s or when Amos started making these things in the 60s, but there was no institutional structure. When I graduated in 1977 from college, the chances of having an exhibition like this were between none and negative none. And actually today, the idea that this exhibition is here today and work that somebody made really sort of in a closet is really amazing. But if we don't record these histories, it's an important thing for us to keep, because it shows that we were here, it provides leadership for people and further generations. And I will posit the idea and stop here, is that I do think that archives and oral histories can be actually the last act of activism. If we don't record these things and reflect them back, we will not have completed our job in changing those communities around us. So I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, I'm up. Yeah, I want to thank Beth for not only bringing me here, but creating this incredible exhibition. I work at the Sheridan Libraries at Hopkins, and my first thought upon walking in was they would never do this exhibition there. And so this is so exciting to have this up here. I prepared a little bit too much, but
Or just enough.
or just enough. But I promised Beth I would keep under 5 minutes, so I'm going to set a timer.
That's what I'm setting on my watch.
Set a timer for 5 minutes. And let's see. So I am going to try to whiz through 3 oral history projects that I have led over the past 15 years and give you a few takeaways from each project. So I'll start with the Polk Street Lives in Transition project. I started this project around 2007 when I was walking around San Francisco as a young queer person, just trying to figure out what it meant to be queer. And I gravitated towards the Tenderloin and Polk Street area. If you look up there, all of those little circles indicate the location of queer establishments, and that's the kind of Central City, Tenderloin, Polk Street area. It's still today a really vibrant queer working class neighborhood. A lot of people of color, trans women. At the time I was hanging out, hustlers, not so much anymore. But this was also during the .com boom. You know, a lot of tech industries were moving in. New business associations, neighborhood associations were closing gay bars, forcing them out of the neighborhood, cracking down on street kids, closing down businesses that they deemed dangerous, right? And so there were protests. People wanted to resurrect the gay polk. They were calling for people to not erase cultural history. So I started recording oral histories. I ended up recording more than 70 oral histories over the course of a year. And I came to a lot of findings. One of them being that these queer working class people developed a politics of reciprocity and mutual aid, and that's just to say that people watched out for each other. They had each other's back. And number 2, they developed all of these ways to instantiate them through performance, through street family kinship, through these queer religious traditions, street churches, through storytelling traditions that I tapped into as an oral historian, and through the development of these migratory circuits. So hustlers commonly traversed the country and traveled from one central city district to another. I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about where Baltimore is in that story. I've heard, I think, from people that maybe the hustlers in Baltimore didn't do as much interstate travel as people in some of the larger cities. I don't know if that's true or not. So I partnered with the GLBT Historical Society, conducted these oral histories in apartment buildings and bars and churches, and I edited many of them into 3 to 5 minute audio portraits. And I started playing these stories at the business association meetings, the business associations that were blamed for closing down these businesses in the area. So one example is Divas, which was a full-time trans club in San Francisco. The new neighborhood association had claimed that it was an unsafe space, that it should be closed down, and they were working to do so. So I spent some time in the club, interviewed people who were there, including Alexis Miranda here, who was the manager of the club. And through oral history, she narrated a completely different understanding of what that club was, the importance of that club to queer and trans families that hung out there, the importance of that club to creating safe space for queer people in the neighborhood, exactly the opposite of what neighborhood associations were arguing. Here's some of the other people I interviewed: Megan Rohr, some of the street kids, self-defined. And then I started playing these stories, these oral histories, audio portraits at listening parties, used them in exhibitions where people gathered to talk about the impacts of gentrification and displacement. Here's some of the narrators who were photographed more. And then finally created a radio documentary, a few of them based on the oral histories that further expanded the audience and the reach. And so the takeaway for this project is that oral history enabled people to assert their identities and insist on the existence of a collective history It fostered dialogue between different people competing for urban space, and it helped shape the conversation about gentrification and displacement in that area. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Ooh,
Wow, look at you.
I am out of time, but
He looked and it had 2 seconds left.
here is some of the other projects that I can maybe talk about at another time. There we go.
Okay, we got it.
Maybe bring that into the discussion.
Sure. Or come up to me after the event.
Hello, is this on? Yes. Okay, I'm gonna set a timer on my watch. We'll see how I do. So you know how memory works, and you can like start the story of your origin from lots of different places. And so I was trying to decide like where I would start this, and my interest in queer history probably started when I volunteered at the GLBT Historical Society. We were just talking about that. We both were there at the same time, but we maybe didn't overlap. And it was so exciting to like go through papers and find new things. And then that's not what I did for my dissertation, and it's not what I did as a teacher. But when I moved here to Baltimore, I was really interested in monuments. I was really engaged in conversations about Confederate monuments, Black memory, things like this. And I got together with a couple of artist friends. Well, they weren't friends yet, but they're friends now, who were artists at MICA. And we were talking, what would a queer monument look like? Because monuments often mark like a spot in time and place where something happened, but so much of queer life is ephemeral, right? That we don't have like some places have got bars and stuff, but a lot of, if I told you the story of my erotic queer life, it would be, all over the place. So we decided we'd build a mobile monument, and our mobile monument, we called it the Lesbian Popcorn Cart, because lesbians were into popcorn. We liked toppings. We had nutritional yeast and popular, right? Bragg spray, and then we're in Maryland, so people kept asking for Old Bay, so we put it there for the lesbians of Baltimore. Anyway, and we realized that we had to go find stories because we didn't know that much, and so that's how I got in touch with the LGBT History Committee at Baltimore Heritage. Richard's here. Richard is, hi Richard, who we did, and I joined their group to do walking tours, and I learned so much from them and realized that, there's such a rich history here. But I didn't have, and then the Gay Paper Archive is at the University of Baltimore, and it's wonderful and it's fascinating. But I know that like there's a lot of gay life happening that wasn't in the paper. So like, how do we get at other kinds of stories to understand the multi-layered experiences of queer people? Now, a lot of my students are in this room, and I say this in every class, so you have to hear it again. One of the main ways that oppressors oppress groups of people is take away your history. To say you don't have one, you never did, try and make you forget it. So for queer people, we have ancestors. We have been here, and I wanted to try and figure out how to build the archive that I wish that I had when I started with the Lesbian Popcorn Cart. And just a lot of thanks to Joey Plaster, and you really helped me feel like I could do this, and I just want to say thank you for that. Because I am a shy person who is scared to talk to people. I know it doesn't seem like that, but I am. And I was nervous, and then I was like, well, let's just do it with the students. We'll just go, and I think they thought that I knew what I was. Did you think I knew what I was doing? Yeah.
Kind of.
But I did some training. I went to an online school and trained, and then I went to the Inheritance Baltimore, the oral history, Baltimore Speaks history trainings, and then my students and I were like, let's just do it. And the first time we did it, it was like we did 3 interviews, and they weren't connected to anything, but we practiced, right? And then last semester we decided to do an oral history project based on a particular group. So we decided to work on an oral histories of the members of the Charm City Kitty Club. Any kitties in the house? Well, if you've been to a show, you're a kitty. We're all kitties. Anyway, I was excited to take these oral histories because this group's been around doing performances in Baltimore for over 20 years, and such interesting stories. And I'm like, it's just going to go away if we don't learn them. But then my other interest was, there are a lot of oral histories. How do we activate them? How do we use them? So Joey's work's been really inspirational, like those listening sessions and using oral histories in that way. Nicole King, your work using oral histories to make arguments about who belongs here, or make arguments about policy, are really important. So I worked with some students this summer. I'll tell you more about that in a second, and they'll show you their work. What do we do with these histories? How do we use them? How do we, what do we remember, and for whom and why? And this project, it is just going to continue, and I also want to thank Special Collections for being the home for it. So there will continue to be more stories, because there's so many. Every experience is different and singular, and that's, for me, what queer has always meant. So
I might switch up the program a little bit, and maybe we'll have the students go ahead and present, since it's
totes. Yeah.
front and center.
Oh, there's an
All right.
there.
So, Ria, Sujat, come on up here. I'll give you this podium in a second. So Ria is an undergraduate student, sadly in their final year. I mean, good for you, but also at UMBC, majoring in psychology and gender, women's, and sexuality studies. While working on the LGBTQ oral history project, they became fascinated by the history of Cabaret, the Charm City Kitty Club situated in the broader Baltimore queer scene. For their project, for the collab, Ria created a zine mapping the history of the club, focusing on themes of performance and community. So you'll get a look at this zine, and then Sarah over there is helping us figure out how to get it printed, because I panic sometimes when I have to do tech stuff. And Simone Koning, hi. Simone is a loving, multiracial queer being. You are. It's true. They're graduating this December with a Spanish linguistics major, Latin American studies minor, and intercultural communication certificate. Simone enjoys cooking, dancing, and performing in drag as Andy Erogenous, and you're real good. For the LGBTQ Oral History Project, she both collected and activated interviews in her creation of a podcast. Simone is grateful and excited to share his experience and to continue his work on this project throughout this semester, because we're doing independent studies so we can get more podcasts. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. And how much time do we have for this?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So do you want me to time you? Okay, you got it.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hi everyone, I'm Ria, and this summer I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Kate and my lovely peers to help develop a website where we collected and activated oral histories.
Use the mic.
Oh, yeah. How's this? Is this better? Okay, so as I was saying, I worked with Dr. Kate and my peers to develop a website where we collected and activated oral histories from queer students and faculty here at UMBC, as well as members of the Charm City Kitty Club. And for some backstory, the Charm City Kitty Club is a queer performance collective here in Baltimore. They've been active for about 20 years now, and they typically put on a variety show twice a year where they do performances in drag, burlesque, spoken word, and poetry. So I had the opportunity to interview 2 members of the club, and I also listened to a lot of the interviews that we collected from them. And through doing this, I became really curious about the history of the club, and how it was transformed in the broader Baltimore community. So what I learned is that each member had such unique lived experiences, and at the same time, a lot of those experiences overlapped. And so I wanted to create something that told a cohesive story. So for my summer project, I created a zine mapping the history of the club. So I have some pages and snippets from that to show you all today. So a lot of the members of the club expressed feeling a gap in their lives. There was this mutual longing for a queer space that was lacking in their lives prior to the formation of the club. So the first page of my zine, Longing for a Queer Home, I wanted to highlight the necessity, the importance of forming that community through the Charm City Kitty Club. And while we were listening to oral histories, we also noticed a lot of overlapping themes. And the ones that really stuck out to me, the ones I thought were most important for creating the zine, were the themes of performance and community. So I also have a page here where I talk about the importance of performance in expressing the fluidity of identity, in feeling embodied, and the importance of performance to heal. And on the next slide, I also have some images. These were donated by the founder of the club, Lucky Baltimore, and she donated a lot of postcards and newspaper clippings. So on the left is a show postcard from, I think, 2007, and on the right is a photo of some of the members performing. So those are just some snippets from my zine, but my overall goal was really to tell a story. What I've learned is that oral histories are such an important and yet overlooked research tool. And so in making my zine, I wanted it to be a way not only for me to channel my creativity, but also to maintain the integrity of storytelling because it's such an inherent part of oral histories. I was also really influenced by the punk atmosphere of the stories being told. A lot of the members came from punk backgrounds, and they really brought that attitude into the club and into their performances. And zines to me very much capture that punk essence, and so it was the perfect medium for me to channel the energy of their stories while telling their stories. And in doing this work, I really learned a lot about the queer community while simultaneously building community in the work that we were doing. And a month after the project, my peers and I and Dr. Kate got to see the Charm City Kitty Club perform in Baltimore. And it was perfect timing because we had just finished up the internship and it was their first show back after years. And it was really surreal to see them perform after feeling so connected just through listening to their stories. I was able to reconnect with one of my narrators, and it was just a really beautiful thing to be surrounded by queer joy and community. And it really surprised me to feel so connected to this club and to their stories. But that really is due to the power of oral histories, and I'm just really grateful that I got to be a part of this project.
All right. Thank you so much, Ria. Hi, everyone. I'm Simone, she, they, he pronouns. And as Ria discussed, we did work on the LGBTQ oral history project for this year's collab. So as a team, we worked to both collect as well as activate the oral histories that we had collected. My activation of choice was a podcast. I have often been told that I should put my voice to some work, so went ahead and did that finally.
You got a podcast voice.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you want custom private meditations too. I've also had some requests for those. Anyway, in creating this, I needed to add my own analysis of what our narrators shared, while also taking incredible care of their words. I think that we must understand the gravity of our work as we are entrusted with the words of our elders for the sake of those to come. So I listened in critically to what our elders told us, what they wanted us to walk away with. And in my oral history with Rain Alexander, for example, who is a very early member of the Charm City Kitty Club, pictured in the middle right there, and whose partner is actually one of the founding members, I had the wonderful opportunity to go ahead and visit their home and conduct our oral history there. And Rain emphasized her experiences regarding loneliness and combating it through queer community, as well as terms and how they shift over time, and unique challenges of modern queer life. So in my podcast creation, I made sure to kind of pull out all of these particular moments of discussion that I felt that she continued to emphasize, and to go ahead and pair them with my own analysis and my own experience as the inheritor of this great queer legacy. I also want to bring to the fore the significance of intergenerational dialogue within the LGBTQ community. She pointed out that oftentimes we feel so lonely because there is a constant reinvention that we are conducting as queer and trans folks. We think that we're the first ones ever to feel this way, or the first ones to ever do this or experience this, when that's not the case. We just haven't had the privilege to connect with one another and speak to our elders. Because as Dr. Kate mentioned, our oppressors are going to rob us of our history in order to eradicate us and erase us. So, connecting with our history, our living history by connecting with our elders is incredibly, incredibly important. So much so that Rain and I even discovered that we had a very small world moment with each other, very small world queer moment with each other. And we discovered that I had actually met her 5 years prior when I was 17 and had seen her in concert. And afterwards actually went up to her and told her the importance that she had in that moment of seeing her on stage as a queer elder to 17-year-old little queer Simone. And we hugged and we cried. And she emphasized that this is the work. So I'm really overjoyed to share the work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really fantastic. There's a lot of really incredible work happening right here at UMBC. Yeah, Kate. All right. So we're going to shift into a little discussion now that we have so many ideas kind of swirling around. So maybe just to ground ourselves, we'll start with the sort of basic question of what is the unique contribution of oral histories to traditional methods of relating LGBTQ history?
Let me go first. I think I touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but I think what it has to do is almost the systemic and institutional marginalization of a particular community. And so it's the idea that particularly those of us who came from a different generation, although I would argue for those of you who are in college now, it's the same thing but only different. We live within a heteronormative world, but by and large. And so those of us who don't swim in the heteronormative sea, it is somewhat easier now, but we have to make stuff up as we go along. So the value of the oral history is actually to be able to record what has happened, again, for ourselves, but also to lay things out going forward in the future. And I was so struck by what Simone said in the sense that the importance about looking at gay elders and hearing those histories. But you know what? I'll tell you something personal. It is just as important for people in their 50s and 60s to understand what queer life is today. Because one of the things that will happen to you when you get older, as a member of the queer community, you will become isolated. Because the wave has been, and it will continue to be, around a younger curve and a younger group of individuals. And so the oral histories are very important because they connect me as much as they connect you. And so this is a path that we're all going down on our own. I'll stop there.
I'm going to cite Simone as well. When they said that storytelling is at the center of oral history, I think that's true. I think one of the things oral history can tell us is how storytelling operates in particular queer cultures and how queer and trans people use storytelling to reinvent themselves and almost as a performative. So, for example, one of the oral histories I conducted about and as part of the project I just described was with a bartender, Coy Ellison. I just started hanging out in this little dive bar called the Gangway. I chatted with him as he was, pouring drinks and, I observed him telling these fantastic stories to people in the bar, and in the process creating this kind of queer world, But then once I started recording his oral history, he had told me that he escaped an abusive household when he was very young, in his early teenage years. He ran away to San Francisco and was able to find work on Polk Street and some of the gay businesses and bars. And one of the ways he was able to do that was by coming up with a completely different persona. So he started passing himself off on the street as an illegal Irish immigrant. And he had like his own accent that he developed. He had a backstory that he developed and told. And he lived full time as this persona. And we conducted about 3 or 4 oral histories. And it was only towards the end of our relationship that he was able to articulate that, I developed this persona in part because it endeared me to some of the bartenders and business owners, and they liked me being around, but it was also a way for me to create a different past and a better past and dissociate from the more abusive past that I wanted to get away from. But then it was also finally a way for him to create a new identity. He started telling these stories about this strong, kind of heroic illegal Irish immigrant, and like very slowly grew into the story he was telling. So in that way, like his storytelling was not just to describe some kind of objective world. It was performative and theatrical. It was meant to bring a new world into being. And so I think about that too when I look at some of these photos. I mean, there are these amazing evocative stories around the photographs, and I'm sure that there is empirical truth there, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that the stories, I think, marginalized and queer youth and street youth in particular were telling were a performance. They were meant to bring something into being.
Yeah, so a lot of times in classes where students do oral histories, they practice by doing oral histories with each other, and then that's kind of thrown away. But I agree. I wish I knew what it was like to be a queer student at UMBC 40 years ago. Like, what was that like? Did they have a club? Like, did they put on a parade? What did they do? Did they have a kiss-in? And so I'm thinking about like the me in the future would want those stories, right? And I want the texture of things, right? Everybody is I say this in my classes all the time too, everybody is as complicated as you think you are, right? So the communities, there's a way that we can have a single story of what gay life was like, and that's the danger of like the going to the gay paper only, right? That is a very particular set of organizers, right? There's other kinds of queer life happening, and so I want to hear lots of stories so that I can keep in mind that the radical singularity of all of us, but then also how we build community. There's this essay that I still teach by John D'Amelio, Capitalism and Gay Identity. Anybody read that? Yeah, you read that. And it's a historical argument about the emergence of the conditions of possibility for gay people, and we talk about that. But the end, he's like, why do we need this history? And we need this history because the conditions that break down the family, like capitalism doesn't need it. We don't need a nuclear family anymore. So like, how do we live in this atomistic individual society, like where everybody has to figure out what to do with their aging parents by themselves. I mean, it's just how to take care of their kids. But if we learn from the stories of queer people who've had to build community outside of those norms, like we can like find some really important means of survival. So it's also for me about like, how did you do it? Like, how did you make a life in this world that didn't want you to be here? Because I need some help with that. So I think the stories are really important on lots of levels, and those are a couple.
And also just to I keep on looking at this image, and I don't know the Kitty Club, but it's such a powerful image, and I imagine that this is from either a flyer or postcard or something promoting this particular event, which I love. The Price is Dyke is just it's
Price is Dyke.
but-
It is, yeah.
But what's really the importance of an oral history is that we have this image. This could exist somewhere in an archive, but we don't know what the room smelled like. We don't know who those people were. We don't know what happened backstage. We don't know what happened when the police raided. We don't know how difficult it was. Those are the things that's really important to be able to ask those questions to those who can tell those stories and who can actually put that stuff in a way that it's recorded. Because if this paper were to exist, if these images were to exist all by themselves, it gives us something, but it doesn't really flesh out enough of what we really want to see.
One of the things that I'm sort of picking up on is thinking about oral histories of people who have been marginalized and storytelling that exists outside of institutions, and this idea of institutions systematically excluding queer people. So I'm interested, what do you think is the role of institutional archives in preserving queer oral histories? Are there tensions there? What are the opportunities? How do you see that relationship?
I feel like this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, maybe so. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess we just realized that both of us had been at the GLBT Historical Society probably
Probably
one
at the same
year
time.
after each other. Yeah.
I was there in 2000.
We need to do an oral history
We
of
do.
our relationship to the Historical
Yeah.
Society. So that's an institutional archive. It's a community-based archive. It's very different from the archive that I'm working at now, which is Special Collections at Hopkins. A lot of the rules were very different. I mean, the archivists gave both of us, I just discovered, a key to the archive, which is unheard of. And so I would go there just late at night when no one was around and sit in the stacks and pull these papers and just like commune with the queer ghosts, and it was
Those
so
boxes.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And smell, you're talking about the smells, like you open a box and you smell the cigarette smoke that may have like existed at this club that you're reading about. It's so cool. But I'm getting a little bit lost. One of the projects that I'm working on now is a collaboration with the ballroom scene in Baltimore. And so that is a very complicated and contested collaboration between Johns Hopkins University, which has done so much harm to trans and Black Baltimore, and this incredible performance-based counter public that's made up of queer and trans people of color. And so when I started, I was very trepidatious. I was very apologetic, and I still am, really. But what I was surprised by is that when I started conducting oral histories with people in ballroom, in the Peabody Library, like we would go up into the stacks, and there's a secret little room in the back, and I would take people back there and record stories about the ballroom scene. So many people are so excited about the fact that their stories are now archived in this historic library, that stories of ballroom are now archived alongside, volumes from Milton or, Homer. And I think for them, it's an acknowledgement that ballroom performance is creating knowledge too, that ballroom is valuable, that ballroom is, worthy enough, I guess, to be in the Peabody Library stacks. Now, is the Peabody Library worthy enough for ballroom? That's another question.
I think the other thing too is that if you, for example, if you went to the Stonewall National Museum and Archives website, you would find there is a listing of over 150 queer archives throughout the United States. And they are large and small. And so you will see organizations this size, and you will see the New York Public Library, and you'll see major institutions who are now trying to catch up and trying to collect information about this forgotten part of American history. And so it's important because, again, as I said in the beginning, it is a community which was marginalized, and it didn't even believe its own history should be recorded. It wasn't opposed to it, but it didn't think it was important to actually save all this ephemera. So one thing I would say is that whether it is a community archive, which has tremendous value, or an institutional one, be sure, if you know individuals who have materials that need to be saved, you need to save your materials today. It's important to record your life simply by saving those materials. I always used to say, don't throw it away, let an archivist throw it away. let someone else make the decision that it's important, because it has to be put into that right context. So there is some makeup that has to be done, because it certainly was ignored. But I will say it's good and bad that the institutional archives exist, and they're catching up, and they're filling things, and they're filling up their shelves and their coffers. But again, they are living by institutional rules. And so they're not necessarily accessible to everyone. So that the experience that you described about a community archive where somebody hands you the keys, be careful, but those are very important as well, as far as being able to find access to this information.
In hearing you speak about storytelling and a sort of call for everyone to collect their objects, and that personal histories are important, or crucial. Storytelling, telling your own story, is very, very personal and vulnerable. So I'm curious how you view your relationship to those whose stories you are collecting.
Let me tell you about our release form, right? It's so good. The narrator owns their story. They can stop the interview at any time. If it goes up on the website and they want to take it down, we'll take it down. We have, you have to give, and in my experience, narrators, as we go through the release form in detail, are like, yeah. They're just like, I have a lot of issues about, concerns about ethics, right? I wrote my dissertation about monks in late antique Syria, because I was like, well, I can't mess up here, right? I can't, no toes to step on, they're not around. And you have to be so careful, and I think that's really important. And also, people want to tell their stories, and so I think that part of the ethical practice is making sure people know that the story is theirs, and building a relationship over time. Like Amos built these relationships over time. So, where you did 3-4 oral histories, you build that trust. Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I guess building on that, I also do use a Creative Commons release form. Right. And so I explain it to people when they look at the release form. This means that you own your story. You're not giving it away to this institution. And, in my particular case, you're not giving your story to Hopkins. So what else do I think about? I've been thinking about how people should be compensated financially for their storytelling labor. And so over the past 5 years, at least, which is when I started at Hopkins, I've started paying people to, not to recount their lives, but again, to do that labor of telling their story. What else? But I guess the ethical questions that I have had to grapple with have changed radically over time, and they really depend on the very particular institution you're working in, the people you're working with, what kind of relationship you have. And there are times when it may not be possible to have the the best and most ethical relationships. So an example I can think of is conducting oral histories about the history of Vanguard, which was a street youth activist organization founded in San Francisco in 1966. And I interviewed 3 of the original members, and then 2 of them demanded that I recognize them as the sole founder of the organization. So, what is my ethical responsibility then when there's no kind of easy out, when you're going to disappoint someone? And I'm still grappling with that question.
They say they're the sole founder.
Right.
No, it's an important question. I do, and I agree with everything that people have said. One thing to take a look at is, believe it or not, there is an American Association, an academic organization of oral histories, and the website is oralhistories.org. And they actually have very good ethical standards, and I think they lay out the standard that we as professionals should follow. Clearly the issue about...
Microphone?
I'm sorry?
Could you please use the microphone?
Oh, you're not hearing me? No? How's that? Is that a bit better?
It's better when you're close.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so they lay out a lot of ethical standards that I think that people should pay attention to. I think the other thing is the idea about remembering that it does belong with the individual. And so one of the most important things I always have to try to remind myself is that I have to remove my experience from the conversation. I'm expected to come informed with some kind of contextual knowledge about what I'm having a conversation with, an individual about. But it's important for me to govern myself that I'm not putting my own gloss, given my age, my gender, my point of view, or anything else on it. The opportunity is to get the individual's history out as clear and as accurate as it can be about that individual.
So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a second, but I'd like to bring it back to Amos to sort of close out. And I'm wondering, now that you've had a chance to view his work in the exhibition, what do you think his contribution to this discussion that we're having is, his contribution to these histories?
That is such a big question. I'll just tell you about an experience I had looking at there's a photograph over there on that wall, and I was reading the story that went along with it, and one of the things I think is really powerful about oral histories and like a lot of these pictures is it challenges our ideas about identity, like that there are gay people and straight people and that these identitarian terms, and just in the things that Amos has written and the stories, we get such a more complicated view of that. So I was looking at a picture and reading, I was like, okay, that's my queer theory class, like the whole thing is right there. So I think that is for me incredibly powerful. Also, just the photographs are so, I can't believe that he taught himself before YouTube. I mean, just incredible photographs and really beautiful. So I'm grateful for his work, and I'm grateful for y'all for bringing it to us. So thank you.
Yeah, and maybe I'll build on that again. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Oftentimes when people start queer oral history projects, that the narrators they're going to attract are going to be the people who most strongly identify as queer or gay, are the most open and out, are the most politicized, and so you get a bit of a slanted view of what queer communities look like in any given place. So, I mean, Amos has done really an incredible service by documenting an incredibly underdocumented segment of queer culture, and a segment of queer culture that may not identify as gay, lesbian, or even trans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think if you go through the writings of the histories that Amos took from individuals, gay was not necessarily a slur, but it wasn't necessarily a way that they used to self-identify. These were individuals who had personal and intimate relationships with members of the same sex. It was pretty much a binary between male and female at the time, but it was just simply that they didn't want to label for it. And even that is an important part of the story here. But I think he's done an amazing job. There are over 40,000 words now that we have pulled out of these images that he has worked on, which tell just an amazing part of American history in the latter part of the 20th century, and part of American history that's not been told in many other ways. So obviously I'm biased, but I think it's a huge contribution to what the queer history was that came out of the post-Stonewall years, and I think and leading up to it, and also what came out.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience, and I'm going to rush over to you with the microphone so that everyone can hear your question.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
And I've done a bit of oral history work with Dr. Kate and the LGBTQ plus oral history project. And one of the questions that I've had while working on the project is how do, like, when you're doing oral history, oftentimes people talk about things that are so intensely personal and emotional for them. And creating a space that they feel safe and they don't feel obligated to share that, they don't feel like they have to do that emotional labor, but they are welcome to, can be really tumultuous. And I'm wondering, like, that even goes to our regular lives outside of conducting oral history. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on building that environment.
And you're saying advice on building an environment where people feel safe to either express or not express? Okay.
Empathy is a wonderful thing, and I think that it is something that you have to emote, and you have to communicate. You have to be careful of reading the individual, not just the content, but what actually is happening to them. You have to be flexible. You have to be prepared at any time to stop. You have to be prepared to get a glass of water or have a tissue close by. But I kind of think you have to go with your heart in that. I don't know that there's any easy way. Clearly, you can't do it in a Starbucks, which is busy and crowded and a lot of other people around. I mean, clearly you have to do it in a situation in which somebody is going to want to share, and particularly if it's something which is painful for them. But you can create that environment. I think you use your best judgment on it.
I think sometimes you also have to start with yourself, and start by trying to understand why are you doing these oral histories? Like, what is driving you to do that? What is your desire to hear these stories? And then sometimes communicating that to your narrator, that helps you to connect and helps your narrator to understand your point of view. But then I would also just say, it's important obviously to think about your narrator and their emotions, but think equally as much as yours, because doing these intense interviews can have an impact on yourself as well. So find time to decompress, to talk with a therapist, to do anything you need to do to deal with some of the emotions that are coming up.
We have a question back here.
I came with Richard and another from Paige. Richard's been out in the community since the 70s, Paige and I since the 80s. And so when we came to see the pictures, we had never heard of Amos before. And so I went home, and he actually published a book in 1999. It was on Amazon. And I had gathered that he was quite a private person and stuff, but expanding ourselves. There's a gay bookstore, Lamp the Rising, and I don't ever remember that book, and it's a big, like 12 by 14 book, being there. So can you tell us a little bit about how did he get I would assume publishing a book, you have to deal with people, and it was at Duke and all of that stuff. So what was his life like, personal life? You know, he obviously was not big in the community.
Yeah, I think he was active in the community. There's obviously somebody in the room who can speak with much greater detail than I can on this, but I'll do the best I can, Bill. He was active in the community, and certainly he was going out at night, and he was going to bars, and he was engaged. But I don't think that he viewed himself as an artist, and I don't think that he wanted to have the life of an artist. There's definitely evidence that he had a few exhibitions at that gay bookstore that you mentioned. And because if you go to the City, which was the Baltimore newspaper, I've found clippings there of him having an exhibition there. But he wasn't particularly ambitious in that way of putting his work out that way. As he got older, he was more interested in his legacy and the work that he had put together. So the book that you're referring to, Baltimore Portraits, which Duke published, there was an exhibition of his work at Duke. There was an individual curator who was responsible for the exhibition, and then also for Duke University Press for printing that. He had an agent at one point, and Random House did the second book, and so that book came out. And then as he got into his 70s, he started donating to Queer Archives the prints, and that's where I met him. When I was the director of Leslie Lohman, he was bringing prints there, and he would show up with boxes of them. And then, so there are probably 1,000 or 2,000 prints there. And then at the One Archive, he started bringing prints there as well. So as he got older, he started rewriting the stories, and so as I said, he was alive up until 2 or 3 months ago. So he was very aware this exhibition was happening. He was very aware that the book that we're working on is happening. He now has a gallery in New York. He wasn't always so happy about that, but work is obviously selling. But so as he got older, he became more comfortable with understanding his role. And that's why somebody in Baltimore might not know that much about him, because many people have said they just simply didn't know that this guy was here. But it wasn't like he was closeted in his house. Bill, how many nights a week was he going out?
Every night, basically. I met Amos in 1984, and we were intimate partners for 20 years. And I've since been with my husband for 20 years. But Amos, yeah, he was persistent. And the book, the Duke University book, we were going to sell the house in Charles Village, and one of the buyers was to be the director of Walter's Art Gallery. And he really liked Amos's work, and that sparked an interest that then led to a show and a book at Duke University. That was very helpful. So you have to be persistent, and sometimes things happen in life that you don't expect, and you have to go with it, and that's where the Duke book came from.
And so there's a Random House book too?
Yeah, St. Martin's Press, I think. St. Martin's Press did a book shortly after that as well. So we're going to maintain his house in Charles Village as a library and gallery kind of space. So.
Oh, that's exciting.
That's cool.
Open yet, or?
Well, it's our home.
We're all coming over.
The painters are just finishing with some repairs and things, but it's quite accessible, and it's a very nice. He would be thrilled for folks here to see the place.
I think I saw you first, and then you, and then you, and then I think we'll wrap it up with his, food.
Can I say
Hi, my name is Ava. I want to say thank you for being here. It's really interesting. My question is, what happens after you take the oral histories and you document them and you finish editing and you put them away? How do you make these resources available to students who maybe aren't in a university and don't know that they exist? People that maybe need to hear the stories, need to know they aren't alone, but don't know that there's something there, an exhibit like this. So what work, or is there or has there been done to make these oral histories, reach people who need them?
I'm going to speak to that, and then I'm going to rudely jet off because I have to be somewhere at 7, so I apologize for that. I know, it's a bummer. I'm bad at planning. This is like that's like the question for me, like what do we do? And so I think that like the audio stories or the podcast, the zine, which we'll print and put around the city. So I love like zines and stuff that you didn't know, you just went to the bathroom and then there it was on the back of the toilet and now you have a whole world, right? And sharing snippets on social media or publicizing the website. And I think it's also true that you can't reach everybody, and if you only reach yourself and your narrator, that's also sufficient. And that relationship that you build, I know that y'all built relationships with your narrators, the students who worked on the project. So, but yeah, that is the question. How do we make sure they don't just live somewhere and nobody ever gets to use them? And again, I'm really sorry, but I have to run. Sorry, Beth. All right.
Yeah. I want to thank you, Kate.
Oh yeah,
Thank you, Kate.
So, I'll see you at Red Emma's. We need collective bargaining rights. Okay.
All right. 2 more questions.
You will be missed, Dr. Kate. I do want to quote Dr. Kate, actually, as she's walking out, as my question pertains to something that she said in particular, that oral histories allow us access to the ways in which people have survived in a world that does not want for us to exist, and allows me to say, hey, how do I do this? Because I need help. And I'm wondering if you two have any big lessons that came about from your work in terms of how we survive as a community in a world that consistently shows us that it doesn't want us here.
That's a big one. I guess my big takeaway from my research with street kids and the Tenderloin district is that, how do they respond to the really difficult, circumstances of their life? And for them, it was through mutual aid, through taking care of one another, So I think now, increasingly, when you think about the mainstream gay movement, it's about property rights, it's about marriage, it's about privatized politics. So what I took away from them is just the power of mutual aid and taking care of each other.
I think for me, it's personal. And I think that the best example I can give you is I happen to live in Florida. And we have a governor who is just a complete idiot. And he's actually putting together, or has put together, these crazy things about don't say gay, and that people in the state universities can't be using gay, and they can't be talking about queer stuff. But I took the oral history of a school teacher who is 83 years old, and in 1959, the Florida State Legislature put out something known as the Purple Pamphlet. And what the Purple Pamphlet said is it was a way of cracking down on these degenerates that were teaching in the state's schools. And this educator at 82 spent his entire life being in fear of the fact that he would be outed in some way for teaching in a public college. So what I learned from him personally, and I know this may sound like a cliche, but when I see the governor of Florida and other individuals doing what they're doing, I can sit back a little bit and I can say, you know what? This is just a cycle. This happened this number of years ago. Jesse Helms and the NEA happened this number of years ago. And so I'm not, as awful as it is, and it's head scratching, it's awful. But in hearing people talk about those experiences that were very real, it actually gives me a little bit more solace to think that things are not as bad as they actually are right now.
trans people of color community on campus, along with the local team. And I think something that often can get for us is how much of a challenge it is to be able to like create community within an institution that has a lot of regulations and boundaries for us to continue like making a space where we can have our like peers come in and just like create better relationships. So my question is, how can we better use oral history or queer history in general to continue to like bridge the gap between generations and create a more resilient community?
I'm looking at this image right here, which is from our first ball competition at the George Peabody Library, which was this, you know, path-breaking event that meant so much to so many different people. But after I had conducted oral histories with people in ballroom, one of the ballroom artists I was working with said, well, why don't you take those and maybe edit little clips and then put like a really sickening ballroom club beat underneath. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And so I did that, and we had that playing at the very beginning of the ball as people were filtering in. And it was incredible to see people just gravitate around the speakers and say, oh, hey, that's Monique, or that's Enrique, but not in a kind of staid, scholarly, antiseptic way, in a way that was like animated by the beats of ballroom.
I think the best way is to delve into the oral histories and the history as much as you possibly can and find ways in which you can relate to it. And the other part of it is, if you don't find the history that you're looking for, begin to ask questions as to why not. And begin to understand how that history can be recorded, and how institutions who have a tendency or an inclination to record that history, that they take the time in order to be able to do that.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end with a call to arms. I want to thank Joseph, Hunter, Ria, and Simone. This has been a really wonderful conversation, which I hope will continue over the reception. And please enjoy looking around the exhibition, which will be up until December 15th, and encourage other people to come check it out. So thank you so much.
Look at that, perfect timing.
That's a good turnout. Yeah. So do you hang out with Leo all the time?
Not all the time, but I see him. So I put